2013, and the interview is being conducted on the campus of Washington State University Tri-Cities. And I'm talking to Mr. Brinson about his family's history at Hanford and family stories, experiences, memories about that community. So let me start, Bob, by just asking you if you could tell me about sort of how and why your family came to Hanford, when that was, and what family members were part of that sort of initial coming to Hanford.
Well, let's see, I'll start with my mother's family was originally up in Roof when she was born in kind of north central Washington. And Grandpa worked at the railroad station there as a depot agent, telegrapher.
Oh, let's stop. Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Okay. I'm
Right.
rolling.
Okay. All right. So, talking about your family and how.
Okay, yeah, mom's
Right.
family, which was the Molsters. My grandpa was Lewis Lyman Molster, the depot agent, telegrapher at the I think it was Milwaukee Road in Roof, Washington, when Mom was born. And I'm not sure how old they were when he got just a little spooked about the immigrants that were coming in to that area and decided to move. So they moved down to Hanford, and he took over the depot down there and raised his family. And there was Mom and Aunt Louise and twin sisters, Margaret and Mildred, and younger sister June, which they called Babe. And then the oldest one was Uncle Lyman, and the baby of the family was Uncle Arthur. When he came along, Grandpa was busy with the train about to come in, so he couldn't take Grandma to the hospital. So Uncle Lyman had to drive the car, and it's a 12-year-old kid driving driving an old Model T to the hospital.
And where was the closest hospital?
In Pasco.
Oh.
Lady Lord's was I think it was still in Pasco early in that time. But when the word got back that the baby had been born, he kind of slapped his knee and said, "That's the caboose. No more kids." So.
So what year did that family come to Hanford? Excuse me.
Oh, I'm not certain. It's probably in the like 1910 to 1915, somewhere in there.
And the last name was Molster. Is it Moulster?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
they came out of Wisconsin originally, and Dad's family came out of Arkansas. He was only 2 years old when the family moved out here. All of them, his brother Paul and sister Irene, or not, sister Bernice, brother Herbert and Albert were all born. No, not Herbert, except for Herbert. Yeah, they were born back in Fayetteville, but when they moved out to Seattle from there, and that was where Uncle Herb was born. But they didn't stay there long. They moved to you've got it in your notes there, and that one I sent you to one of the towns in eastern Washington before they moved to Hanford anyway.
Yeah.
And they got 1918, I think they settled in Hanford. And not in Hanford, it's at the foothills of the rattlesnakes out there where the Brinson Ranch was, up in where Fitzner Eberhard is now.
Okay.
So they ran the ranch up there and had the sheep and everything, and the boys would raise the sheep that the mothers wouldn't raise. So they had they said it was a great place to grow up, and they got it. The Molsters and the Brinsons were all friends from almost the get-go. From even living 18 miles away from each other, they would visit back and forth all the time. And so that's eventually Mom and Dad ended up. It happened that when they finished with the apple crop down here, the kids would go up to the Wenatchee area, further north, where the crops were still coming off, and so they could get some more work in, earn some more money. And so they were just happened to be up there in a little town close to Wenatchee, and they were picking apples in a tree, and Dad got it in his head that, and asked Mom that he thought they'd known each other long enough that maybe they should think about getting married. And so, so she agreed up there at the top of the apple tree ladder. So that's where all that started. And then I was born in 1937, and then the same trip to the hospital in an old Model T, and Dad grumbling all the way why anybody would want to live out in the middle of nowhere like this. So I only got to experience Hanford for probably 4 years.
Right.
But I did hear tales about how I would like to run off because nobody locked doors in those days. And so if Mom turned her back too long, I'd dash out the door and go down the street, see Aunt Bernice, and she would tell that story on and on and over as she in her elderly years when she got a little bit. I think it was Alzheimer's, probably is what it was, but you know how they repeat themselves, and so I heard that story a lot when I'd go to visit.
So the house you lived in, was it in town, sort of, or did you have a farm, or what sort of place was it that you?
No, it was right in town there because Dad had the little beer parlor, ice cream parlor combination. There was a room in the back where the men played cards, you know, and they had kids that scrounge ice cream cones, and the men would drop in for a beer, and even the Indians would come by and try to get alcohol, which you couldn't legally sell it to them, so he had to keep a little short-barreled .22 short pistol under the counter to kind of dissuade the more belligerent of the tribe when they tried to buy alcohol off of him.
Did it have a name, the pool hall or beer hall, ice cream parlor? Was it?
I never did hear
What the name was?
if it was just the Hanford Pool Hall or whatever. But
Yeah.
but otherwise, it was just there were probably just orchards all around town and up and down the river. So all it was fruit. Yeah.
Yeah. So so the Brinson family had the place sort of 18 miles out. Is that right? That was the sheep ranch.
They worked for the Benson, E.F. Benson, I think was his initials, but he was the owner of the ranch, and he built a house for the family out there. You know, he had running water from a spring, and the kids got to drive into. I think it said in that letter Uncle Herb wrote that it was the county bought him a Model T to drive into school at Cold Springs, but then somebody found out they actually were in the Hanford School District, so they had to, even though Cold Spring was closer, they had to drive 18 miles to Hanford to go to school. So that must have been quite an experience. You can imagine a teenage boy doing stuff like that. Would have been kind of fun, but yeah, that's.
Have you heard any other stories about the school itself, about your dad or aunts or uncles?
No, there was something that nobody ever really made clear, that he did have to spend a year at a high school up north in I can't remember the name of that little town now. I remember he had a letterman sweater with a big P on it. Pateros, Pateros High School. So he must have got into some kind of trouble and had to go away to a different high school for a year. Because it was, I don't know I think it was like 1930 and 1931 when they graduated, and it was 1935 I think when they got married. So there was some time he spent time in the President Roosevelt's CCCs, up building campgrounds and trails in the mountains and around the state, and he actually spent some time down in Oregon on the Salmon River, I think, panning for gold in one spring, and so he had a few adventures away from Hanford before he came back and committed himself to a long marriage with Mom.
Yeah.
So.
Well, talking about FDR and the CCC, any of your family members ever talk to you about the Depression? What it was like growing up or living in Hanford during the Depression? Did it have an impact on the community in any way? Or?
You know, they always talk like it was the most wonderful place in the world. You know, that they didn't have any financial problems that, you know, because everything, they took care of everything themselves. They had their own herds and their own fruit and vegetables, and didn't depend on when the government came along with the social programs. Why, you know, they went off and made $1 a day and sent whatever portion that was required for them to send home. A certain percentage they had to send home, and yeah, it was never heard of a word like there was any kind of hardship at all. So it was.
Now the Mulster family, did they have a place in town then, or were they on a
Yeah,
farm?
the railroad supplied a
Railroad.
house for Grandpa and Grandma. Yeah, and then so he would go down and greet the trains when they came in, you know, and they, of course all the family had free passes, so the kids could, during summer vacation, they could hop on the train, ride anywhere anywhere they wanted to go for nothing, you know. So they'd go over to Seattle, you know, and visit relatives, and
That's nice.
yeah, they had a good time.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
How long was your grandfather work for the railroad in Hanford then? Do you know?
Until the
42?
government came in, yeah, and they moved from there to Prosser, and he retired, and they lived in Prosser for the rest of his life. I think he died in somewhere like 1957 or 8, somewhere like that. But
Do you have any idea how busy of a train station, like how often trains came through? Once a day, a couple times a day? Do you know?
I never heard. No, you would expect maybe at least once a day or to have to keep a
You would
guy
think
there.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I was wondering about you talked about the beer parlor / pool hall and ice cream parlor.
Yeah.
I wonder if any of your family members ever talked about recreational activities, you know, picnics or 4th of July celebrations, or things that the kids did for fun or whatever at Hanford.
Well, just when they'd visit the families back and forth, you know, they'd go out to the Brinson Ranch, and on Sundays usually after church, and they'd have a big supper, and like I said in the write-up, they would make a big tub of ice cream, you know, probably with salt and ice, and stir it all up, and when they come the other way down to Hanford, and they probably went to the river in a summer day, because that's where the whole town gathered, right there in the swimming hole. And only place to keep cool. And you can imagine those blistering summer days like we get around here back before we had a lot of the agriculture we have now. It wasn't nearly as cool, probably.
Right. Yeah. And then there's winter also, which is a completely different.
Oh yeah, there's pictures. I've seen pictures at the reunions of the frozen Columbia with a herd of sheep going across. You know, and just amazing. And they'd be ice skating, of course, on the same place they'd swim in. They'd be ice skating on it in the wintertime. So it was.
Now, when your family was at the Benson Ranch, right?
Dad's family, yeah.
So it was a sheep. Did they also grow crops at all? Apples, peaches, anything along orchards?
No, it was all
sheep.
strictly for wintering the sheep, I think, mostly.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the springtime they'd drive them out onto the sagebrush flats out in the range to. Well, even today, if you drive, we just got back from a cross-country trip to Kentucky and out through Wyoming and Utah. There, you see sheep all over the place, and you see the little carts out there that the sheep herder lives in, and it's just like it was back then, you know. It's just so.
Yeah. Now, you talked about the Brinson and Mulster families being close, and were there other families, do you know, that?
There
parents were close to or knew really well.
When they had the get-togethers, the reunions were just the happiest times when they'd all get together and they'd hash out the old memories, you know, and they'd talk about the people that ran the mercantile downtown and the different neighbors, you know, it was too young for me to remember most of the names. I remember a few names, you know. I think the store was run by the Boy family, And of course there were the Clarks. And yeah, Aileen Clark was one of the latest. She went to our church actually, and she's the one that always tried to organize the sing-alongs at the reunions. she would play the piano and try to get everybody to sing all the old songs, you know. So
Yeah.
and
What about churches in the community? Were there a number of
I
churches?
think there was only a Presbyterian church there. I think that's what everybody went to. That they were so inclined anyway.
Mhm.
So that was.
And did your family get to some of the neighboring communities very often, to White Bluffs or Richland, or I know
No,
the
not
hospitals in
that-
Pasco, but were there?
Not that they've mentioned very often. They've had quite a rivalry going with White Bluffs. That even carried on into the reunions. You know, the Hanford folks and the White Bluffs folks still had a few issues even going into those later days. So there's probably sports teams and such like that. Yeah. So
Probably schools and sports teams.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit now, maybe about the World War II and when the federal government decided that they were going to, build a site out where the community of Hanford was, and what do you know about that, or what have you heard from your family member? I know you were only 4 years old or something at the time, but what sort of stories have you heard or about
Yeah,
that?
there
from your
was
family?
a lot of bitterness, and even to this day, some of the, like that one fellow you mentioned that you had interviewed before. I'm sure you must have heard from him how hard it was on some of the folks to practically walk away from a orchard that's ready to probably pick and produce a crop and make a profit for you for the first time, and you have to walk away from it. You can imagine what kind of bitterness that might produce. But see, we'd already left by probably 1942, and Dad decided a growing family needed a better income, so he got on at the shipyards over there in Tacoma, and Grandpa followed, and we lived together for a while over there, and until the war didn't come back till 1948. But you heard the stories at every reunion from just about the same people, and they repeat the same stuff. Yeah. And Grandpa Brinson got after all the work he did on his place, planting the peach orchard and everything, he got $700 whole out of the government for it. And I'm sure it was similar for a lot of the other folks. Yeah.
$700 is what is all.
That's all he got for his house, outbuildings, and orchard. Yeah.
So you were in Tacoma. Your family was in Tacoma, though, at that point. Is that right?
Right before they.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you hear about it at that point? Do you know, did your family hear about it from?
Well, I'm sure there were. I'm not sure how they communicated. Mostly by letters, probably. I don't think there was. Well, there must have been long distance at that time, but I don't recall. Of course, being at that age, a lot of telephone traffic at all. But I'm sure they heard from the folks, because after it happened, we'd take a lot of trips back over the mountains to visit Grandma and Grandpa there in Prosser, and so that's
They had moved to Prosser then.
yeah, a lot of folks moved to Prosser. A lot of them moved to Yakima and surrounding towns out through there. So they scattered them pretty good. So it was always nice to see them come back. The reunions were really crowded in the early days. But
Do you know about when those reunions started?
oh, it had to have been in the late 40s.
So pretty soon
Probably
after
in
the war.
Yeah, 47 to 49, somewhere in there, probably. That was such a, the kids, all the kids noticed was, free ice cream, free pop, that's all we got. And a lot of grass and trees to play around under, so that was, so my sister was the one that she would love to sit under the picnic table, listen to all the adult talk going on, but us kids, us boys, we just run around and play. You know, he didn't care about that kind of stuff. So she heard all the stories, but you couldn't talk her into coming for an interview, huh? You could.
So when did you, since you were only 4 years old or so when your family left Hanford, when did you sort of first become aware of your sort of family story here and what had happened to the communities here? You know.
Oh, well, when they would take us to the reunions, you'd hear the stories, and of course even family get-togethers, you'd hear it too about because we'd always have a get-together, you know, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, you know, there'd always be a family get-together, so you'd hear all the stories around the dinner tables and all the fellowship around that time, those times of the year, and there'd be a lot of good humor, joking, but you know, there's always that underlying disappointment. You know, that it would have been nice to have carried on and grown up and realized the full potential of a community like that. You know, out along the river would have been a beautiful place. So
Yeah. So I was going to ask you. You know, one of the reasons we're doing this project is to get memories and stories about families that live there, so that someone in the future, a student maybe, or maybe a descendant of yours, could listen and, you know, watch the video. And what sorts of things or anything that you would especially like people like that to know about, or know about the community of Hanford, or about your family, that you think it would be important for them to know about?
Well, probably the most important thing would be I think the freedom you felt like you had in those days, when even at 4 years old, when you don't realize the importance of it, you had it, you know, when you could just run out of the house and go visit some aunt up the street, and not worry about being lost or being, you know, abducted by some nutball, or, you know, you know, the people were independent and helped each other, and it was, you know, just you know, compared to how things are today, wow, you know, it's just, yeah, don't get me started on the politics going on today. You know.
So in other words, it was a community. I mean, it's that sort. That's sort of saying that, with people who really felt like a community.
Oh yeah, they were. You could tell when you see them at the reunions how close they were. There's a whole lot of hugging going on.
Yeah. Well, just the fact that they had those reunions and kept doing those for so many years suggests, I think, a real strong bond, right?
The people that organized those had to really be committed, because that took a lot of work, sending out all the letters and getting together all the food and all the materials it took, and they would put out, you know, tables and tables of old photographs and newspaper clippings and stuff like that. And I hope you were able to get a hold of some of that.
I did. See some of that. Yeah. Have you or any of your family members ever gone back, you know, say on one of the tours that goes out, or been able to go see the former town sites out there?
A few times we went out to you know, at the one time when they let you take your cars out, and they'd kind of travel out there following the DOE guy, you know, and they'd let you park and walk around, try to find your old home site, and Mom always knew by the shape of some tree about where their house was. And I remember Cousin Dick went with us one time, and he got to poking around out there, and he actually found a little fish pond that his father had built for him. It was all covered over by sagebrush and stuff, but he managed to find it and brush off the stuff, and it was just made out of stones that were just kind of cemented in. It was probably no bigger than that, but it was, you know, only so deep, but it meant a lot to him to be able to find that and remember that part of his life, you know.
Wow. Do you know when that might have been that he went back out there and found that?
Oh, that was probably in the late 60s, early 70s in that area. Yeah.
And you mentioned that your mom was able to sort of by shape of a tree know where things were. What sort of response did she have to going back out there? Did you get a chance to talk to her about that, or were you out there with her? Or?
Yeah, she was. Oh yeah, she liked, and her thing, like I said, was down at the old swimming hole. That was she could she kind of graded everything by where the swimming hole was. Where that meant that, and then she could figure out where that tree was, and then that house stood right there by the tree. You know. Some of the houses they moved out of there and to other parts of the countryside that weren't on the project, and they were, I don't know, some of them might still be in use today for all I know. Yeah. But oh yeah, she'd get excited every time we go out there and remembering things. And
So she seemed to really appreciate being able to go out there again.
oh yeah, and invariably it'd be a real hot day and it'd be uncomfortable out there. And you usually gather around the old high school there. The shell was still standing, and it was must have been, I guess, the bank building. Maybe that was in White Bluff, so it was still
Bluff's
standing
bank, right?
too. Yeah, so there was.
Yeah.
So
And she must have had, if she could remember that well just by a few things that were
Yeah.
left. She had a real, she knew that town.
oh yeah, she grew up there. Yeah,
She knew it well.
Yeah, that was when she used to tell us about sleeping out on the haystacks at those hot summer evenings, and listening to the coyotes howl and falling asleep to that noise, and what she called music. So that was.
Do you remember any other stories she used to tell you about things like that that would have been sort of unique to the area?
No, not really. She did leave to go to Seattle to go to secretarial school and or business school. She called it business school. So she went to a couple of years of that. And then probably right after that, they probably got married. And
With the proposal in the apple orchard.
Yeah, and then moved to Tacoma for in probably 42. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
But they did have a lot of the close friends that they could talk for hours about the old times, the good times, Especially if the sisters got together, boy, they could. Man, it was.
It sounds like she had a lot of very fond memories of.
They were, yeah, she was.
And did your dad talk about the old community much, or?
Oh yeah, they had the men's fraternity, I guess you'd call it, were pretty close. They had a lot of, especially the high school kids. They were the hardest one of the hardest things I ever saw in Dad was when one of his friends was killed at Guadalcanal, and it took him a long time to get over that because it was his best friend, and that was. So yeah, they were really close. Yeah.
And so you said your family then moved to Tacoma, and then 48 came to Kennewick. Is that?
Came back to because Dad got a job at the. Actually, we stopped for a year in Prosser and lived with grandparents until we finally bought a piece of property in East Kennewick, and then he had a house built, and we lived with Herb and his family in the on East Fifth Street while the house was being built on East First Place, and so eventually got moved in there and spent. That's where us kids grew up, right there in East Kennewick. So.
And what did you think of Kennewick when you came back, when you moved in?
Oh, it was nice. Just immediately there was guys to run around with, and we just, formed a bond right there. We were 4 musketeers. If there were no gangs back then, I guess we were about as close as you could get to a gang.
Yeah. Did it? I guess I asked what it would feel like, sort of being in the Tri-Cities, knowing that a lot of the people in the area were working out of the Hanford site, which is sort of where your family used to live. Did it have any feelings about that? Did it seem a little odd at all, or strange, or what are your thoughts about that?
Well, we didn't really think about it that much. Most of the activity was, closer to Richland and in the Camp Hanford area, and right out there where the town site was, there was never any. It just happened to be in the middle of the condemned area, And so, and it's yeah, I don't think we ever resented. We were, too young to work up resentments at that point. We were having too much fun growing up in East Kennewick. Because back then, East Kennewick went clear out to Finley. You could roam forever out through there. Yeah.
So, are there anything that I haven't asked you that, or any event or memory or family story that you haven't had a chance to talk about yet that you'd like to?
Oh, it's one of those things that you might wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "Oh yeah, I should have said that." But right now, I can't draw on anything else. It was just with all the aunts and uncles and the friends, it was just a wonderful time of life and a wonderful place to have been a part of for a little while anyway. And
so I do have one other question. So I know your father and grandfather and your family went to Tacoma. What happened to say your cousins or aunts and uncles, cousins, other families you're related to?
well, the mom's oldest brother ended up in California as a bulldozer operator. The twins, one twin, Aunt Mildred never did get married. Aunt Margaret married a wheat farmer out of Walla Walla. Let's see, Aunt Babe married Uncle Doc Jones from Tacoma. They lived in Tacoma, lived out there years in Tacoma. And see, Uncle Arthur worked on the fire department in the Seattle Fire Department. Let's see, on Dad's side, Herb ended up running a Chevron station right down at the end of Washington Street there in Kennewick, and later on moved to Spokane and ran one up there in Dishman. And Uncle Paul moved to San Bernardino and passed away down there after raising a family.
So did all the Brinsons then go to Tacoma, pretty much? Your uncle?
Generally in that area, yeah. Uncle Albert ended up in Renton and raised his family. His son Gary is the Gary Brinson of the Brinson Fund, multi-million. And he built a building there on the WSU campus in the business, for the business college, I guess you call it, yeah.
But he was younger than you, correct? Or?
Oh yeah, just a few years, yeah.
So did he live out at Hanford at all,
or? No.
Okay, yeah.
They all grew up at Renton, yeah.
And then what about the Mulster side? Were they still in Hanford, living in Hanford when the government came in during the war? Or?
Yeah, because that's when Grandpa had to drop the depot agent job, retire from the Milwaukee Road, and move to Prosser. So, and I don't know if Aunt Margaret hadn't married Uncle Bud at that time. So, they were in she and Aunt Millie both joined the Navy. That's right. They were both in the Navy till the end of the war. So that's where they went. And so Uncle Arthur was also flew in the whatever aircraft that was. That he was a navigator bombardier off of a carrier airplane of some sort, P-40 or something like that. So fortunate to have survived. So. Yeah.
And did you or any of your family end up working at the Hanford site?
No, Dad worked at the fire department in Richland, for the rest of his career there, Central Fire Station. And when I got out of the Air Force, I spent a couple of years at CBC and got into the physical chemistry laboratory out there in 300 area. That's worked out there for 42 years. So retired in 2000. So yeah, that's paid for my put a couple of kids through school from
Sure.
working out there. So yeah, it was a good place to spend a career.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So any final thoughts about the old Hanford town or your families, either the Mulster or Brinson family and their experiences
Yeah, that's
there?
yeah. Well, the biggest thing is just missing them all so much. Just because it was such a wonderful family to grow up in. So supportive and loving, and just getting together at a drop of a hat. There's so many get-togethers and camping trips, and it was just. I wish I could have grown up older there and had more memories of the old Hanford town, but that's the way things go.
Well, I appreciate you
Yeah.
being willing to come talk and share your memories and your family stories about Hanford and the
Yeah.
community out there. I really appreciate it. So
Well, I
thank
wish
you.
I could have helped you out more. Okay.
This is terrific. Really great. Thank you very
Well,
much.
Okay,
Appreciate
you're welcome. Yeah, I'm glad you got a chance to talk to Mom there that 12 years ago. Yeah. She made it till 97. She made it.